and you were like, hey, I did something really despicable. You know what's so amazing too is they're trying to rewrite history. Obviously, one of the ways they're trying to rewrite history is to say we were the victims of the fraud. We in the media were the victims of the fraud, and we're so angry at this inner team of Joe Biden's White House advisors who kept this from us, who hid this, even though the entire public knew forever. But I've written about this so many times, it drives me crazy how easily history is rewritten. The first time I ever heard concerns about Joe Biden's cognitive decline was back in 2018 when the Democratic field was coalescing of people who were going to run against Donald Trump. And they were really worried Joe Biden was going to get the nomination solely by virtue of name recognition because he was the vice president to Barack Obama for 8 years, was viewed as loyal, has been around forever. And they all knew there was no way he could sustain the rigors of an election because he was in cognitive decline. And so it was like these Democratic operatives, like Andrea Mitchell talked about it, Cory Booker and Julian Castro in that 2019 debate, all made fun of Biden for not being able to remember what he had said three seconds ago. It was the Democrats who were raising it, trying to alert everybody that you shouldn't vote for Joe Biden because he's not the same Joe Biden he was. I'm not talking about 2023. I'm talking about 2018 and 2019.
Remember.
The minute it was down to Joe Biden and Bernie Sanders in the 2020 primary, that's when all of a sudden the media narrative shifted and it became the only people who are talking about Biden's supposed cognitive decline are Bernie bros and MAGA people, and it's absolutely immoral and disgusting. And that's when I wrote an article saying, what do you mean? You were the ones who first raised it. I heard it from you, those DC insiders. So it's not, and the only reason why, what saved Joe Biden from that was that COVID happened and he got to run the campaign from his basement where he only talked to like Nicole Wallace, who spoke to him like some, ailing grandpa. You know that voice that you use for like your ailing grandpa, like, Mr. President, or Mr. Biden, hello. Oh, and then you do that fake laugh if they get even close to a joke, because those were the kind of interviews he was doing. And he was in that basement in Delaware. That's the only reason why he could sustain that campaign.
But it was so widely known. I mean, his sister, Valerie, told a good friend of mine that she didn't want him to run in 2020 because he had dementia. My former makeup artist, was there in the room when he was injected with amphetamines before an event more than once during that campaign. And like I said all that on TV, and everyone I knew in DC who knew Biden, I knew Biden, said, yeah, no, he's got dementia. Like everybody knew. Everybody knew. It wasn't just like some right-wing Twitter thing where people were being cruel. It was like the people who knew Biden knew that. So like, how could you not know that?
I think the reason this media fraud of all the other media frauds that have been perpetrated is probably the most damaging. In 2016, they pushed this whole deranged, demented conspiracy theory that Vladimir Putin had sex tapes on Donald Trump where he was being urinated on by a prostitute. And of course, if you know Donald Trump, that's pretty much the last thing that of all the people on the planet.
It's one sin he didn't commit. Yeah, no, for sure.
but it was that sort of thing. Like they always accuse people in independent media or, whoever of being conspiracy theorists. Like think about that conspiracy. Like Donald Trump was being blackmailed by the Russian government into sacrificing the interests of the United States to serve the interests of the Kremlin. That really was the predominant media narrative from 2016 to 2018. So that's what they did to try and stop Trump the first time. In 2020, weeks before the election, the New York Post had very serious reporting about the Biden family unethically exploiting Joe Biden's influence in Ukraine and China to profit not for themselves only, but also for Joe Biden. And we were told by the media over and over the lie that this is Russian disinformation, that this laptop the contents of it should be ignored because it's inauthentic. That, of course, was when I left The Intercept because they wouldn't let me write about it, claiming that there were doubts about its authenticity when I knew there weren't. But that was, and then Twitter and Facebook censored it. But on those kind of questions like Russiagate, the authenticity of these emails, like for most Americans, they don't have the competence to judge that because they do other things. But when it comes to seeing older people in cognitive decline, most of them have had that experience with like a grandparent or a parent or a sibling or a neighbor or whatever, and don't need to be told by quote unquote experts that is happening because they can see it with their own eyes. And for the media to have sat there for a year and a half and told everybody, as Joe Scarborough said, this version of Joe Biden is the best Biden we've ever seen. I mean, imagine being such a state propagandist that you do that and then keep your job. I think that's why this scandal is so devastating to them, and why, like, when Jake Tapper stands up to write a book saying, I've uncovered the truth with investigative reporting, everybody is reacting with justifiable nausea.
You got to admit, it takes some balls to do that, though. I mean, I famously advocated for the Iraq War, realized in 2003 that it was a bad idea, and said I was wrong. What I didn't do was write a book saying, like, it was wrong and I always thought it was wrong.
Or like, hey, I'm here to write a book saying why the Iraq War was based on falsehoods. It's like, we already know, Tucker. Thank you. Right? Like, you didn't go and write that book because you were the one helping to perpetuate
exactly.
them.
I totally agree. So I guess without repentance, without the acknowledgement of wrongdoing, of dishonesty, without saying I screwed up and making that the headline, nothing that follows is credible at all. It's like all fake unless you admit your role in the lie.
Right. Which and if that happened, if you said, like, look, I was really swept up in the media bubble I was in, and I want to tell the story of why I did this or how I got, like, convinced myself of this lie, then there would be some nobility to it. There would be some value and worth.
Yes.
But this is what I mean. Like, there were several people, but myself was included, I was bashing the table every day. We were compiling tapes of Jake Tapper doing all the things that I had just referenced. And I remember at the time, Jake Tapper always serving the Democratic Party in these ways. And his initial response was to send out, like, publicists to try and, plant stories that I was lying, that I was manipulating media. There was one in the Daily Beast, one in the Huffington Post.
Wait, actually attacking you personally?
Oh, yeah. They were pitching stories like, yeah, and there's, they were in, like, shitty liberal sites that no one, like Huffington Post and the Daily Beast. There was a couple others. But they had pitched them, like, to the New York Post and to the Wall Street Journal, I think, as well. Like, New York Post got in contact with me. They didn't run it because it was so easy to prove that.
What was the allegation?
That all of these incidents that I just described, and there were others as well, of things he did on his show, were, like, taken out of context, or the video was manipulated, just like they did when people saw Joe Biden wandering around on that D-Day and had to be, redirected by Georgia Maloney, or having been taken off the stage by this. That's the other thing. They didn't just deny it. They attacked anyone who said it. People in 2024 who were saying, oh, look, Biden clearly doesn't know where he is, including at that event with Obama, that big George Clooney fundraiser. The Washington Post wrote an article saying they were using, it was a new phrase, cheap fakes. Like, they weren't exactly fake, but the narrative was fake. And it was anyone who said Joe Biden clearly is in cognitive decline. If you look at him at these events, they were called right-wing disinformation agents. And as it turns out, George Clooney ended up saying, the reason why I wanted Biden not to run was because the Joe Biden I saw at that event was completely unrecognizable. He was like he has dementia. And at the time when people were saying, like, clearly he doesn't know where he is, being let off the stage by Barack Obama, none of this was new. This is what we had been seeing for so long. The media affirmatively used that disinformation term that has become their weapon of deception and propaganda and smearing people who tell the truth, to label all of that disinformation. And so they were the ones who perpetrated the fraud. And now they're pretending like they're the ones uncovering it. It is so, I think the reason they don't get it is because of that insulated bubble that they exist in. They all do believe that they're truthful, they're good, they're benevolent, they're nonpartisan, and that unfortunately there was no way for them to have told the story because Mike Donnellan was lying about it, or Jill Biden was keeping the truth from them. And so what can they do?